Hello and welcome, welcome everybody to MEF Connects Innovators. Usually, around this time of year, we would probably be in Barcelona. As a matter of fact, today would have been the day after the MEF party in Mobile World Congress. Though, as we well know, this is not the year for that. We did manage even last year still to get quite a few thousand people actually in Barcelona, but that was the last wind of before the big pandemic really hit the world. And the present is different for sure, but the present has found different ways to manage to connect and bring people together. So as usual, we will bring for our AGM, our big members meeting, not just our members, some of the leading thinkers in the mobile world, but other leading thinkers in the mobile world to discuss new themes and new things. The themes are important. We have found many, and some of them were really innovations. 20 years ago, somebody started talking about a mobile thing, which is going to be bigger than anything else we knew, and possibly delivering entertainment, video, media, information, education, work over the mobile. And that it was completely crazy. Telecommunication was then, as we know, change. And those innovators 20 years ago were together in an association called the Mobile Entertainment Forum. And that's what became Mobile Ecosystem Forum. So 20 years, just 2 weeks ago, officially is actually a bit older than 20, but we'd like to cheat on the age. But officially 20 years of MEF, it's a lot. So we have a different present, we have a fantastic past, and guess what? We don't want to stop. We want to talk about the future. So the theme for today is MEF Connects the Innovators. Just like 20 years ago, people were talking about things that probably many would not expect. Today, we want to look at what's coming next. The best thing we have to combat any possible issues, obstacles like the pandemic, is to actually find our ingenuity. And we have many here. I'm very happy to tell you that today we're going to talk about AI, 5G, IoT, the new set of regulation we will see coming. We're going to talk about fighting fraud as well, as we always do at MEF. But we're also going to take a bit of time to talk about ourselves and our working groups, the themes, the different things we discuss usually in-house. And today we do it openly with everybody. And I should say everybody, and I'll be very fast because 400 people have already signed up to this event, which is the largest of our AGM ever to have had. So our discussion is reaching very wide and with many people. So enough about me, really, because I promise today I will not be on video very much. I want to invite instead people that are really setting up the standards, that are really setting also the agenda for the next 20 years, or at least the next 5. Well, and we have somebody that can really say that they do set the standard next. And this person is Pamela Clark-Dixon, the principal analyst at Omdia, previously known also as an Ovum and many other companies in the analyst market. So one of the most eminent analysts, which is going to give an intro to the innovation cycle, actually, how things turn into completely different, from telco messaging to messaging apps. And now let's invite from Brisbane. So good evening, Pamela. How are you?
Good morning, Dario. I'm very well, thanks. How are you? And what a kind introduction. Thank you very much for that. That was lovely. Good to be at this event today.
Very much well earned, Pamela, and also double brownie points because you are fighting the weather over there in Australia, where I understand a big thunderstorm weather issue is really hitting you. So fingers crossed to everybody over there. And,
yeah.
to your presentations, I will really now turn away. I will see you later, and I will be here in case anything, we're using a new platform, everybody, as you might have noticed. Welcome to our social platform. But I think there are some teething problems. We don't have your videos, Pamela, but we have your presentation, and we have you, and that is perfect.
Okay.
So I'll leave it up to you.
Great. Thank you so much again, Dario. So yeah, it's my pleasure to be here to speak with you all today. And thank you to MEF for the invitation to do so. So yes, I hope we won't get cut off by thunderstorms. They were rumbling about a little bit earlier, but seem to have settled down now. So we will just proceed, and we'll see how we go. So yes, as Dario was saying, I'm going to be talking to you from an analyst viewpoint. So just to introduce myself, quickly. So I'm the principal analyst for advanced messaging and communications at Omdia, and I sit within the service provider consumer practice. Just to very quickly move through, I will try not to spend too much time on these first few slides. It's really just giving a bit more of an introduction. So I've been covering this market for more than 20 years now, and not much longer than MEF has been around. So happy birthday, MEF, as well. I didn't realize that you were 20 years old a couple of weeks ago, so that's a fantastic achievement as well. I've been looking into the telco and messaging app market for most of my time in the industry. I also cover application to person and RCS as well, so and produce a range of different products for Omdia on these topics, as well as participating in consultancy. And I've also had the honour to attend and speak at some industry events as well. Sadly, obviously none happening at the moment, but hopefully next year everyone will be back in Barcelona and in Shanghai. So Omdia, just a couple of quick slides about Omdia. We're a global research firm. Our objective is to provide our clients with intelligence that they can act on to make their business decisions. So we're spread across the globe, around 400 analysts and consultants in around 25 locations across the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific as well, where I am. So Omdia was born from a number of acquisitions that have been made over the last 10 or so years. We obviously had Ovum to start with, Heavy Reading, Tractica, IHS Market. These were acquired just in the last couple of years, and they were joined together, about a year or so ago now. We were to have a big launch event at Barcelona, and that was to be our big entree into the market as a combined entity. So so we're quite a solid unit now, and we have recently, well, a little while ago now, launched our new website with all of our fantastic content and data on there. So here's my agenda for today. I thought to begin with, seeing as the theme of today's event is innovation, that I just do a very sort of quick run through, what is innovation versus invention, what drives innovation, and just a few observations on how we've seen innovation evolve in the telecoms and tech space. And then finally, just a quick sort of look at, well, can telcos innovate? They come in for a lot of criticism these days as being followers rather than leaders, but let's have a bit of a discussion about that as well. And then a brief look at digital revenues for telcos. Where are the revenue opportunities? Where should telcos be investing so far as consumer services are concerned? I'd like to then look at telco messaging, talking about SMS, A2P SMS, and then RCS as well, how this is all kind of setting the foundations for services and revenues to come. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't also look at where messaging apps are at the moment as well. We've seen some great innovation from the messaging apps, and that's not over yet by any means. Okay, so invention and innovation, does it even happen in telecoms? So just a quick sort of definition of innovation, what is it? It's a simple sort of three-word question, and we have this definition here from Merriam-Webster. It's a new idea, a new method, a device, a novelty, the introduction of something new. So to break that down, the first telephone we could have thought of as an invention. The first mobile phone we would regard either as an invention or an innovation, but the first smartphone was definitely an innovation. It really started to shape the mobile comms industry for what is happening now and what is to come in the future. And I love that meme. I'm sure people have seen it loads of times about everything that we now fit into a mobile phone, which used to be these great clunky individual devices like Walkmans and TVs and video players and so forth. So to think that all of that we can now access all of this content and even do make purchases and so forth on a device that fits in our hand. I think that is an incredible achievement. Just in the last 20 years or so, we have really seen that take off. So so in terms of invention, the quote there is necessity is the mother of invention. We know that an invention typically meets a need, and these have been happening since since mankind first started thinking about his world and how he interacted with it. The ones that I've highlighted in blue here are to do with the telecoms industry, and particularly over the last 20 or 30 years ago. So and so when we talk about an invention, if we look at, say, when that it typically meets a need, wouldn't it be useful if I can make phone calls from a device that's not tethered to a wall? Although I guess in the early days of mobile phones, they weren't really that portable. So, these are some examples. We needed fire for heating, cooking, tools, cutting, shaping, and connecting, antibiotics to stop people from dying, the printing press, disseminating information, democratizing knowledge, and then, transport, railways, airplanes, cars, getting people from one place to another. In the technology space, the telephone and the mobile phone initially for communications between people who weren't in the same space, although now obviously for people who are in the same space but just don't want to talk to each other face to face. So, if anyone's got a teenager in their household, they'll know what I'm talking about. If we look at key components in mobile devices, batteries and transistors and so forth. So, a lot of these things make much of our modern lives possible, right up to the internet and the World Wide Web, really changing the way that we live our lives from what it was even just 20 years ago. But if we look at invention as being a different thing to innovation being a different thing to invention. Oh, I'm having trouble moving on from here. Hang on a minute. Okay, so if necessity drives invention, what then drives innovation? And there's 5 sort of key factors here, and I guess the first key one is disruption. So, you have a widget, you've invented it. Everybody wants to make them because they know that people will buy them. But if you take that and then do something completely different with it, you have that potential to create a completely different market. And if you're lucky as the innovator and you've made it just tricky enough that what you've done is not easy to replicate, then you get to keep most of the revenues until your competitors arrive. And so, we've got examples here of things like electric cars with Tesla. You've got messaging apps with WhatsApp, for example, CPaaS and APIs with Twilio. The next area would be improvement. So these are innovations that are going to be driven by companies' desire to enhance an existing product. So we see this all the time with messaging apps, for example. These have gone far beyond simply providing communications. Particularly in markets like China and South Korea and Japan, they're increasingly platforms for content and media, for customer care and for commerce. And we see that this is happening in the global apps now as well. They've just taken a little bit longer to evolve. They've had a few more challenges to address in terms of rolling that out over a global sort of footprint. growth. A company's desire to grow their product portfolio, to grow their user base, to grow their revenues. If you as a company can innovate to make what you're offering stand out from your competitors, and you can successfully communicate that to your customers, then there's a good experience that you'll grow. Competition, another huge driver of innovation. What company doesn't want to do as well or even better than their rivals? And one way of doing that is to develop or tweak a product, a service, a business model to make it stand out from their competition. And finally, demand is another key driver, whether that's coming from a customer, a consumer, or an enterprise customer. And again, this is kind of related to invention. Typically, you have a customer providing feedback directly to a company about a feature, or a company, a business customer wants a particular business problem solved. So following on from this, I've sort of looked at, where have we seen that innovation in telecoms and technology, and I think we can break it down into sort of 4 sort of key areas as far as the telco and the technology ecosystem is concerned. And these are quite broad, as you'll see. So obviously, first of all, we had the telcos, the service providers, and the vendors, and they were really integral to building those global communications networks that we rely on every single day now to stay connected, and even more so through COVID-19. And these companies, they've been doing it for many years. They've been innovating to make the networks fast, reliable, accessible, affordable, universal, and to make their services attractive for consumers, for example, by bundling in access to media services. And even to this day, we see that this segment of the market, of the ecosystem, is continuing to innovate, whether that's with 5G or AI or augmented or virtual reality, that innovation is still happening. Then you've got the internet companies, and they really came along and they've changed the world as we knew it. With things like email, we have browsers, search engines, e-commerce platforms, security software. All of these allow us to communicate and to transact via the software and the services that are also then overlaid on telcos' mobile and fixed networks. And then following on from there, we have another kind of infrastructure component. We have the software and the cloud market. And again, these platforms, they underpin the operations of telcos and internet companies in this early 21st century. So we've seen that decoupling of software from the hardware with network function virtualization. We've seen that services and capabilities are increasingly hosted in the cloud. That's helped to make service development cheaper, faster, more flexible, more accessible. And then finally, we have the messaging apps. And these are probably one of the more disruptive innovations that we've seen in the consumer market in the last decade. They've completely turned the traditional telecoms market on its head. And again, as mentioned or alluded to previously, these apps, they've become integral platforms for consumers to communicate and to share content, and increasingly now to receive customer care and to transact. And again, they do heavily rely on telco networks. So I guess when we look at what's happening in terms of innovation in the telecoms and tech market, there's probably 4 key ways that this happens. We have a number of telcos and vendors and service providers that have set up innovation labs and hubs, and this is a fairly common thing that's happened. And at the moment, the common themes tend to be, and again, Daria also referenced these earlier: 5G, AI, AR and VR, Internet of Things, security, all really key things. And I'm excited to see where we go in terms of some of the services that come out of there. Obviously, some issues as well, in terms of AI, for example, and how do you prevent that from perhaps being too creepy, useful but not creepy, and so forth. Security is obviously going to be a huge issue. One of the things I've been thinking about as I was preparing this presentation is we have innovation that can be negative as well as positive, and obviously things like fraud would come into that. Hackers can be incredibly inventive as to how they get access to enterprise networks and even consumer information. We have incubators and accelerators. These obviously for smaller companies that are getting the seed money. Challenges I know in terms of trying to define who do you give seed funding to if you're one of the companies that is investing in these companies. But generally, a worthwhile exercise for companies to do, and particularly for telcos to do. Partnering programs as well. We've seen a lot of this. I've got some examples there in terms of RCS. Obviously, with Google, it had its early access program, but Mavenir as well as a business messaging partner program. So that aims to share resources and expertise, work on joint deployments, and out of that will hopefully and does come some useful engagements. And then finally, more in the developer space, we've got developer programs and hackathons, and these specifically targeting developers, more for companies like Twilio and Vonage, perhaps Infobip, Cinch, these sorts of companies that are looking at more rapid development of app in a cloud-based environment, for example, perhaps they use a specific vendor or service provider platform. So, there's a lot of innovation and efforts that underlie innovation happening throughout this whole telecoms industry. Okay, and just wanted to provide some recent examples of what I think are some fairly innovative approaches in the telecoms industry. Obviously, a really recent one is Reliance Geo in India, only launched 5 years ago as a 4G LTE operator, and is now the largest mobile operator in India, thanks to the way that it's gone about acquiring customers. It kind of lost money to gain customers, wanted to really fast track that process of getting customers onto its network, and then found that even when it started charging for its services, its subscribers stuck with them, added in a lot of really interesting media capabilities and services, and has that effort has really been welcomed by the big companies like Facebook and Google, raising over $15 billion in investment for geo platforms in 2020. So they've done really well, but done it in quite a different way from the way that other telcos perhaps have acquired customers. Twilio in the US, another sort of probably not so recent example, but certainly within this century, and a company that probably, along with say Vonage and Bandwidth and Plivo, really started that whole communications platform as a service market, which has taken hold today. So pioneering the use of APIs so that it makes it easier for enterprises to add those communication services to their platforms, targeted developers, and has really generated a lot of value, with revenues, just under $2 billion as of last year. So that's another, I think, quite innovative company that's done really well. T-Mobile, its Un-carrier plans. I think these were quite innovative for that market in terms of breaking the rules of traditional carriers, as they put it. They wanted to grow their subscriber base, so they offered a number of different plans. I think it might have gotten up to 12 or 13 that enabled different benefits for their subscribers. And then finally, Turkcell. It's got its own messaging app, communications app, which it launched back in 2013. And so, it's not necessarily unusual for a telco to have launched a communications app. Many have tried, not so many seem to have done as well as Turkcell seems to have done. And in fact, it reportedly got a bit of a boost after the WhatsApp incident earlier this year. So now has about 53 million users worldwide. Not huge in terms of say WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or a WeChat or Weixin, but for a telco owned app, that's quite remarkable to get that amount of users and still be going 7 or 8 years later. Okay. Just wanted to share some data from some of our research. So looking at our telco services innovation radar. So this is a product from Omdia that looks at what services telcos are launching, and we see that telcos are still launching a reasonably high number of services on a quarterly basis, just under 300 in the last quarter of last year, and across a number of different areas of their markets. So communications is up there with about 16, and this is an interesting one here from Belarus, which has its smart sender service, so businesses can send messages to their customers via either SMS or via Viber. Viber is quite a popular application in Eastern European markets. So obviously that capability to send messages via either SMS or a messaging app is something that a number of companies, service providers, like the ones I mentioned before, are enabling through their APIs. But the fact that we now here have a telco that's doing it, and then another sort of service which is coming up is the use of virtual assistants by telcos as well. So, and that seems like my take on this is they seem to be the new IVR, so enabling customer care for their customers using virtual assistants. So lots of stuff happening in the telco market so far as new services are concerned. Okay, so just wanted to then move on into, well, where is the revenue opportunity for telcos overall? So this is our consumer digital revenue opportunity model, which looks into where telcos might be able to or should be looking to perhaps to generate revenues over the next little while. So this compares absolute revenue growth between 2019 and 2024 against the relevance of that particular market to the telco sector. And we do this not only globally, but by country as well. And so the size of the bubble indicates the size of the opportunity in terms of 2024 revenue. So probably no real surprises there that we've got mobile data and fixed broadband generate, obviously big market opportunities, and we'll big market opportunity for telcos, and obviously 5G is going to come in there as well. But we're seeing quite strong growth in things like smart home, in OTT video, as well, digital music to a lesser extent, a smaller market, but growing. And even though we see on the left-hand side there that mobile voice, fixed voice, and mobile SMS are sort of not growing, mobile voice is still, and fixed voice is still quite a healthy size market as well. So yeah, we can see here that telcos are looking at adding diversity to their revenue bases from digital services. Okay, so, and this is just another way of looking at the data. So, we, as I was saying, we identify key areas for telco investment if, they're interested in influencing market development. So, things like fixed broadband is going to underpin consumer services like OTT video and smart home, for example. On the OTT side, streaming media and music services, they're going to remain popular, for the foreseeable future. But we're also looking at smart home, perhaps being positioned to become standard inclusions in say, new build homes, or as consumers start to want to engage, to have devices that actually take out some of the effort of doing sort of everyday things. So that's just a quick look at that. And then I just wanted to move on and look at telco messaging, and my sort of again, a view on this is, it's not quite dead yet. So we recently did some consumer insights surveys, and here we just we can see that SMS, even though messaging apps are quite popular, SMS still has quite high daily active use. We surveyed 12 countries here, so this is the aggregate answer, aggregate result across the 12 countries. So 32%. So it's for daily active use. This is so it's it just goes to show that SMS is still quite resilient. And so, in terms of how that plays out in markets where messaging app penetration is getting to saturation point, still quite high in some of these markets as well, like Indonesia and South Africa, Brazil and China. But it's some of the more developed markets, I guess, that have this highest use of SMS still on a daily basis. France in particular, 65% of our respondents said that they used SMS daily. And so, in terms of the fact that we still have high-ish daily active use in markets where message apps are popular suggests, we still have use cases for SMS, which are more relevant there. And again, knowing that some of the audience will be sort of business messaging focused, we have a reasonably high proportion of online consumers in Turkey and Indonesia, for example, using SMS to interact with businesses. So that's quite an encouraging sign there as well. And so far as the SMS market is concerned, obviously we're seeing person-to-person SMS going declining in terms of traffic and revenues. So we'll see some A2P SMS coming in there, perhaps compensating for that. And some of the key drivers there are obviously going to be traffic growth from new and existing enterprise customers, some recognition of revenue from grey route blocking, and then the provision of some high value services as well. But overall, we're going to see that drop again, I think, in person-to-person SMS after this year. And it's going to be A2P SMS that's going to drive telcos to continue to support SMS in their 5G networks that they're rolling out now. In terms of vertical splits, again, we'll see that there'll still continue to be growth across the forecast period, across all the different industry verticals that we've forecast. Banking and social and messaging are going to dominate, though. They use A2P SMS for a number of use cases, but mainly security and authentication, but also for notifications. We expected COVID-19 is going to have a positive effect from for A2P across most verticals. Obviously, there'll be some travel and hospitality, for example, where that's not going to be the case. But for things like authentication, security, verification, notifications of deliveries, and so forth, that where people are still spending a lot of time at home in lockdown and quarantine, and transacting a lot of their lives online. That's where we'll start to see, or where we are seeing, that A2P SMS traffic picking up. Just briefly on MMS, obviously we've seen that messaging apps are allowing consumers to send photos and videos more easily and more cheaply. So that's had somewhat of a dampening effect on MMS. But conversely, there's also been somewhat of an uptick as well, I suppose you could say, with people being used to using to sending photos and pictures and videos via their messaging app. So sometimes that bleeds over into their messaging client on their mobile phone, and particularly where users and where telcos are not bundling in, where telcos are bundling in MMS into their price plans. So that, I think, is helping MMS a little bit. But still, we're going to see that overall traffic declining over the forecast period. And so RCS, I know, is another topic of interest to many on the call today. I mean, we've been following that as well within Omdia, but we have seen this slowdown of rollouts in 2020 compared to previous years. So even though quite a lot of the world's largest telcos have launched RCS across their global footprints, or within their markets, we still, I think, that's a key challenge for RCS, is getting that true global reach, and also getting Apple on board as well. And I mean, these have been challenges for RCS for quite some time, but that hasn't stopped companies from engaging with RCS, and obviously from getting some good results for their campaigns with RCS, and that's only going to be helped where we see these whole market sort of rollouts happening with A2P RCS, which again hasn't happened in very many markets, and even not with very many telcos, but it's happening in just enough places that it's giving consumers a bit of a taste for what RCS can do. And so again, that's coming out in some of our survey results as well, where we see that almost half of online consumers would use a telco service like Facebook Messenger or WeChat, essentially an RCS-based service, or they either use it already or they would if they were offered it. So that's kind of encouraging, I think, for RCS, for the future of RCS. We see that there's quite a high proportion of online consumers in emerging markets that said they're already using such a service or would like to. So in China, Turkey, and Malaysia, even though we've only had one or two operators launching RCS services in those countries. So yeah, it seems like there is some appetite for consumers for these kinds of services from their operator. And I'm just looking at time. So the last section that I'll go through is the messaging apps, because obviously that's where we see a lot of activity in the market, and particularly it's starting to emerge and to being a customer engagement channel. So as well, so obviously not quite as highly used as SMS outside of in terms of business messaging use, but the pieces are falling into place there. So, and this is part of the reason why we're seeing this saturation level coverage almost of app-based messaging on mobile devices in about half of the markets that we surveyed. So you can see, Brazil and Indonesia, that's around 95% are using app-based messaging on their mobile phones. Malaysia is 94, South Africa is 93. So, that's it. We would imagine that in non-surveyed markets, we would be seeing similar results there as well. So, which just goes to confirm that, this app-based messaging, it's part of most consumers' daily lives now. We are seeing, though, that fewer consumers use messaging apps on the desktop. So obviously, the mobile phone is the prime access device for accessing messaging apps. And that kind of makes sense. It's more of an easier experience. You can take it with you everywhere. So that there's quite solid rationale behind that. So what that means is, we're looking at where messaging app revenues are going to come from, and what that means for SMS. So we've compared P2P SMS, A2P SMS, ODT messaging, and A2P RCS in our revenues and in our traffic. So obviously, messaging apps generate most traffic, and across the four that we gauge. But there's still sort of some uptick in terms of P2P. We saw that for COVID-19, but again, we for SMS, but again, we'll see that will slow down again from this year. But for messaging apps, we think that the traffic is going to keep increasing for the rest of the forecast period. But in terms of the revenue, most of that is still with SMS. I think it's going to take a while before OTT messaging apps are going to start to overtake SMS revenue. So that, I think, is good news for telcos, but it doesn't mean that messaging apps they are still going to, well, they very much are a key part of consumers' life. So, and as we start to see more efforts from companies like Facebook and particularly across its apps, start to engage more in mobile commerce, and that this will start to increase. So, but we're thinking that's going to take some time. In terms of what's going to drive increased growth, COVID-19 obviously saw an increased use of messaging apps during 2020, and likely that will continue during 2021, coming from different demographics. So obviously, up until now, probably not as high use of messaging apps among the older generations, but given that we have had prolonged periods of lockdowns and quarantines in a number of markets, the smartphones and mobile phones and messaging apps have become another way for grandparents, and the old generation to keep in touch with their families and with their friends as well. So, these are new communications habits which are forming among the older generation now, and that I think will push penetration up. So, talked a bit about monetization and what's next for the messaging app. So this is very much going to happen, and again, spurred on by COVID-19. Facebook has seen a growth in the number of people that use WhatsApp Business. So it's obviously it's come out with a number of initiatives there to try and increase its revenues from its messaging apps. And you can see the opportunity here with Tencent. Its fintech revenues in 2019 were quite significant, 28.3% of total revenues. By comparison, Facebook was only 1.5% for its other revenues and about $1 billion. So, there's a huge untapped monetization potential here for Facebook. And it really just needs to bed down some of these efforts to, with payments and customer care and so on its platforms, and that will help it to diversify its revenues beyond advertising. So just again to give an indication as to just how much we're using messaging apps. This is 3 in 5 people in the in terms of the global population are now using messaging apps daily, so or monthly. So obviously having these apps available on mobile devices has been integral, particularly in mobile first markets like India. So this is the single largest market for WhatsApp. Obviously I think it might have taken a bit of a hit earlier in the year. I think Telegram sort of started to get a few more users in India, but that's quite a large total to try to make up on. So just again, we can't afford to ignore what the messaging apps are doing from a consumer perspective to shape strategies over the next 5 years. There will be more innovation. We have a huge amount of people using them, and so we're just not going to be able to discount the fact that these factors. Okay. So in terms of where the traffic is for messaging apps, still mostly text messaging. About 3/4 of all traffic is text messaging on messaging apps. And a phenomenal amount. 126 trillion messages total, and text messaging is about 75% of that traffic on messaging apps. So, and again, people are engaging with these messaging apps a lot. 47 text messages a day per monthly active user, 11 photo messages, and 5 video messages a day on average. So that's a lot of engagement, a lot of messaging. Obviously more traffic happening on mobile than on fixed, probably due to the fact that it takes a lot more effort to add, to actually fire up a laptop or a desktop and send, add a photo in than it does on your phone. So easy to send a message and to send a photo or a video in your messaging app on your phone than it is on your laptop or desktop. But again, just referring back to what I was saying earlier about Facebook diversifying its messaging base, revenue base, this is going to be really important over the next few years. And again, you can see that this is where some of the potential for innovation is going to come from. So advertising has obviously been quite a large revenue generator for messaging apps, not so much the global ones, which don't tend to rely on advertising so much, but certainly for apps in China and Japan and South Korea, as is commerce and payments. So we'll see that starting to drive up over the next over the forecast period. So in terms of commerce and payments, that's probably going to almost double, we believe, by 2024, as companies like Facebook and Viber, start to play more in the commerce space. So again, that's potentially a threat for the A2P SMS market. Looking at and potentially also for A2P RCS. It's something to just bear in mind, that at the moment, I think A2P SMS still has a lot going for it. Businesses find it easier to engage for many reasons. The ecosystem is there. It's not quite there so far as messaging apps is concerned, although it is also something that service providers in this part of the market are working on in terms of their APIs and doing sort of multi-platform campaigns for their customers. But in terms of what that means for RCS, if telcos are going to try and keep that portion of telco messaging revenues, and not have that all go to the messaging apps, that's something that they're potentially having to to work on a lot more than they are now, and we'll need to see a lot more deployments perhaps there to try and make sure that consumers still use telcos for business messaging as well. So just some key takeaways, and I know we're sort of coming up to the end of my time. So just I guess I wanted to say that I believe that innovation is doing quite well. It's quite healthy throughout the telecoms ecosystem, for a number of reasons. We're seeing telcos investing in new networks, new services, new business models. We're seeing A2P SMS traffic and revenues and business messaging and communications in general continuing to grow as well, and there's been innovation like CPaaS, which has driven that market, and programmable APIs. So there's been quite a change in the way that enterprises are able to access business messaging now through these players. We've seen messaging apps taking communication services way beyond what telcos could do, but they're not just sticking with communication services. They want to be complete platforms, and whether that's providing content, commerce, customer care, video calling. We've seen platforms like Clubhouse, for example. That's quite an innovative use of voice, I suppose, as well, and that social networking capability, in terms of people being able to join in or listen in on conversations, which it sort of seems to just take that element of social, but also just that little bit further than, say, a Twitter or a Facebook, and creates quite an interesting service, I guess, for consumers, those who are able to obviously access it at the moment, of course. So that's quite another sort of interesting app that seems to have gained a lot of momentum over the last 12 months as well. But just as a closing comment, I mean, obviously there needs to be a bit of a balance here between innovation that's accessible and practical for people to actually deploy now, and for it to be delivering them business results quickly, versus this more aspirational type of innovation. So when we think back to what drives innovation, growth, demand, improvements, and competition, but we also need this aspirational innovation as well, because that's where there's that potential for a step change, for that disruption to happen and to take industries into a whole other direction. Which I think is also quite vital for the future of the telecoms and technology industry. And so I'm just mindful of time. I think that's 5 to the hour, so I think I've hopefully not gone on for too much over what I was meant to. But again, thank you very much for your attention this morning. I hope I've given you some food for thought and maybe some insights there as well. So yes, again, thank you very much.
Pamela, this is Dario. I'd like to say that the fantastic presentations, and can you stay with us for 5 more minutes? We're doing fine with time, I think. And we have a couple of questions. Talking
Great.
about ingenuity, we didn't tell, there's a new platform, we didn't tell where to ask questions. Well, I forgot.
Okay.
And but people still found the way to do it, both on our Q&A sessions, and you got it on WhatsApp and LinkedIn. So thank you for sending it.
Great.
We'll start with the one that I see here in the platform. The first one comes from Philippe. Philip Linder says, Pamela, is there any info on out-of-band SMS use case? First, Pamela, do you know what the out-of-band SMS use cases are? Because I did it. I went on. Thanks, Philippe. You know, you always learn something new. I went on Google to find out.
Okay.
And there seems to be I would refer to them, and Philippe, correct me and tell us in the Q&A. These should be the use cases. One, give a one-time password, so you're online and you receive an SMS with some information. That's how I got it. So all those use cases, whether we know, probably constitute a large chunk of the SMS A2P traffic right now. So then Philip probably was asking, what else do we have there in that market? What do you see in terms of these, I guess, authentication, authorization examples of the SMS technology? Do you have any view, Pamela?
Well, I think most of, I would tend to agree. Most of it sort of seems to be going towards these security and authentication sort of use cases, and increasingly so while people have been working from home and in lockdown and accessing, their Microsoft Teams or other sorts of platforms for doing the remote working and working from home. So I'm just trying to sort of wrap my brains and think, well, where else could that be used for, sort of single a single application kind of SMS. Yeah, I mean, mostly, it seems to be more around codes. So no, I don't really have any sort of inspiration on where else out of band SMS can be used. I mean, there could be sort of consumer applications, I suppose, where I don't know, you could do competitions and so forth. So, but I think whether those sorts of things would work, sort of games and competitions, but whether those sorts of things would work, like you would send, I don't know, a trivia question or something. I'm just pulling things out of the air here. But it's kind of gaming perhaps, but then who kind of engages with SMS as a consumer that much anymore? It would have to be more on the business messaging side, I think.
Well, thanks for that, and Philippe, by the way, and we're going to have more on all those use cases, including the OTP one, in our event in March, from the 22nd to the 24th of March in MEF Connect Business Communication. So we'll have time to go back and ask more about that. But I have a lot of questions, so Pamela, hold up for a few more minutes. One, I think I wanted to ask, this one comes from Ian McCallum from MEF, really, but it's one I could ask you as well, which says, well, do you have a view on Google's current stance on RCS? You talked about RCS. And Google has repositions somehow by providing P2P connections, mostly within its own MNOs because of limitations, and really providing an OTT service, almost, I should say, on top of RCS. Do you think this is shaping the industry? Do you think it's got an impact, or is it just a natural evolution right now of RCS as we know?
Well, I think that something needed to be done in order to get RCS more widely penetrated than it is. I've always thought that one of the strengths that Google and has brought with RCS has been this native capability, making it natively available on devices, and I think that is going to be what grows penetration. People just realizing that they have it, but of course that's difficult to do if you don't have operators launching the RCS services. And there has, I think, been a fair amount of skepticism from operators about it, and also some fear, I think, of Google and its motivations in this market, given its history with messaging apps. But I think that if we're going to see RCS take a strong position as a business messaging channel, then these are the sorts of initiatives that have to happen. You have to get that penetration up, and whether it's Google that does it, and from what I understand, I think where Google launches the guest service, for example, this OTT service, I believe that once telcos have launched in that market, it's quite happy to turn that service back over to the telcos. Correct me if I'm wrong, and they've changed their stance on that. But anything, I think, that actually gets the penetration of RCS to a point where most consumers have it on their devices, with the exception of iPhone users, obviously, and makes that more attractive to brands, I think is not a bad thing.
Well, and Pamela, I got lots of questions now, and so I will ask you for telegraphic answers for at least two of them. First, I will read Philip Linder coming up and say it's probably a good example of using SMS for toggling appliances. So he's going at the out of band, as in you
Yes.
mentioned, and the almost IoT element. Interestingly,
Okay.
thanks about the
More
RTS.
IoT. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I will
Yeah. Okay.
have two quick questions on there, one after the other. One comes from, apologies for my names here, Kwenga Ngobozi, saying that the new generation of messaging apps uses, not all the time, but I use often, if not all the time. So what's the future of mobile SMS? Kwenga says, and what's the next step for telecom? You had some good messaging there, saying SMS is not dead. But what should the telco do right now to make sure they last as much as possible?
Well, I think we still have this resilience of SMS, as I mentioned in my presentation. So people are not going to stop using it. We have this messaging app fragmentation, which is where that comes in. So where people don't have the same messaging app, they'll fall back to SMS to communicate. And it is another one of the messaging channels that people use alongside their messaging apps. So to start with, it obviously needs to continue to be supported in 5G, and the architecture is there for that to happen. You can't have someone with a 5G handset not being able to send an SMS to their friend who might only have a 4G handset, for example. And then obviously, we still see this quite vibrant A2P SMS market, which is another reason why SMS still continues to need to be supported in 5G, because that market is not going to go away within the next 5 years, I would say, and possibly even longer than that. I refer back to the fragmentation of the messaging apps, and the fact that it's not going to be as easy for enterprises to engage with them. To the point where they're engaging with SMS at the moment. So telcos, I would advise to continue to support it. Wouldn't say change your price plans with 5G, because obviously having that low barrier in terms of usage, having unlimited messaging, for example, that obviously needs to continue. You can't change that. But yeah, I still think that going forward, you need to be looking at RCS, at least for A2P messaging, trying to have some kind of solution there for your enterprise customers is going to be quite important. And then if you have that for your enterprise messaging customers, if you have that for A2P, then you already have it for P2P. And it's, I guess another thing to do would be to, and I know probably efforts are happening with this already, is to encourage some kind of RCS support with Apple, but how that will go is anybody's guess.
Well, we will see. We've been talking for a while, and but we might get some information soon, and we'll see about that.
That's been said for a long time.
Somebody else. So we will see what happens on RCS, what happens on the future. But I think your message is a very encouraging one. I think we couldn't start with a better upbeat message, which is innovation in the telecom ecosystem is alive and kicking. I actually wrote that also on my LinkedIn because it was a nice way to tell everybody. So Pamela, thanks this time as well for giving us a bit of a cheery mood beginning as well. And I hope weather-wise things are all doing okay around there in Queensland and Brisbane. But thanks again also for taking the time to take part today. So thank you, Pamela, and I hope we'll see you soon in our events again.
Great. Thank you very much, Dario. It was my great pleasure. And I wish you well for the rest of the day.
Great. Thank you. And to all of you, we are in about 4 minutes. You're going to have another panel from us. We're talking about AI next, and it's a fantastic setup of speakers as well. I'm going to be sitting down and taking notes while we do that. But thanks for taking part of MEF Connects, and do ask your question and your comments over there in the Q&A. Thank you. Bye-bye.